Have I got a treat for you? I'm back at one of my old stomping grounds. 25 years ago it must have been since I fished this little river. It's the River Sence in Leicestershire. It's actually a little tributary of the River Soar. Most of it you can jump over, but there's this little area here, this little corner where it opens out. Now there's a story behind this little peg, because a long time ago my grandfather bought a bit of land for my mother. It had a river running through it, this river. He didn't know that she was going to marry an angler. He didn't know that they were going to have a son who was mad on fishing, me, and didn't know that he was going to spend most of his childhood messing around in this river. So I thought I'd come back to the very peg that I used to fish all those years ago when I was like 10 or 12 and have a go. Unfortunately, I arrived yesterday. Everything's changed. Everything does change, but there was a tree hanging over the river. It's actually grown into the river, blocking all the flow. You couldn't fish the peg. And this is actually an old watering hole for the horses. And to be fair, the tree needed clearing out. So I got to work with a bow saw, cut the tree down, made myself a lovely open peg. I've planted, it was a willow tree, so I've put the branches further around the corner where the bank's slipping away a little bit. So hopefully they might root and might shore up that bank a little bit anyway. But we're left with a fantastic looking peg. Obviously I waded around it with the chest waders yesterday, found a few deep holes and a few little surprises, and it's amazing when I think about it. There used to be little holes and little spots where you'd always catch a fish. And when I went out in the chest waders yesterday, I could see why. It obviously drops off. There's holes that are maybe 2 foot deep and the bottom's all over the place. So it's going to be really interesting fishing. I can't wait to get started. It's proper old school. I'm in the chest waders. I'm in the water. I've got a bait waiter. Keep nets in the water. We're roughing it a little bit. I think target species today are going to be dace. I'm hoping we're going to catch some chub. We used to catch the odd roach here, the odd perch, but mainly it was dace and chub. And it was quite a stealthy sort of attack. You couldn't catch loads of fish by piling loads of bait in. But I'm looking at this river now and thinking there's a bit of extra water on. We might have a really good day. We might be able to feed a bit of bait and actually make something happen. So I'm going to start with 2 maggots on the hook. I've been feeding a little tiny bit. I've got with me some hemp and some maggots. I've just been feeding a little tiny bit while I've been setting up, just to obviously get things going. So I'm going to start on 2 maggots. And let's see what we can catch. I'll run through all the details of how I'm fishing once we get going, but I'm itching to have a go. So classic stick float fishing. Like I say, a bit of flow on it today, so it should make the fishing even better. Be great if we could get maybe a fish or 2 early on, just to boost my confidence. But there's quite a lot of river downstream, so the fish could arrive and maybe follow the bait up at some point during the day. There we go, first chub. Oh, he's come off. I think that was a little dace. A little dace. You can see I'm only using quite a short rod, 10 footer. I mean, this peg, it's still pretty overgrown. There's still quite a few brambles and things overgrowing. So anything longer would just cause problems, I think. So again, maggots, bit of hemp. I don't think you can go on any river without any hemp. Obviously fish love it. Here we go. First fish of the day, let's see what he is. I think he's going to be a dace. Oh, roach. See, there we go, straight away we're in the brambles. We'll sort that out in a second while I show you this fish. Look at that. Cracking little fish. Hopefully we'll catch a few more. Hopefully we'll catch some quality as well. I'm going to untangle my rod from the brambles, carry on fishing, then I'll run through the gear I'm using today. So folks, It's early on in the session, but I think this is going to be one of my most enjoyable days of the year. It's a bite every single chuck. We've had some nice fish as well. See what this is. My last fish was little chublet, about 5 or 6 ounce. Look, there you go, cracking roach, look. Beautiful fish. To be fair, we never used to catch fish like this on this little stretch of river. It always used to be sort of like dace and little chublets. It was only sort of later on that we used to sort of catch a few roach. I think the river has been cleaned up massively, so that's probably helped. Right, let's talk about the kit I'm using. So I've mentioned I'm only using a little short rod. This is actually a little carp waggler rod. It's a 10-footer. It's a reactor core 10-footer. Like I say, I don't want a really long rod. I think that's going to cause issues with these bushes around us. And obviously, because the flow's going away from us, there's no need to have a 13 or 14 foot rod to mend the line. We just need something that's a little bit shorter and a bit easier to use. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put another shot on that float. So 10-foot rod. Next thing we've got is we've got a light main line on the reel. Really important when you stick float fishing to use a light main line. I'm using 014. It's actually really a pole line, but it's a really nice line. It's 014 low vis. Using that light line just means I can control the float a lot easier. So as it goes down, I can control it, mend the line loads easier with that lighter main line. It means I can use a slightly lighter float as well. So float wise, it's all stick float fishing. With a little fish, let's see what this one is. There you go, nice wiry dace. So it's all stick float fishing. I've got 3 number 4 stick float on. It's not a deep peg, it's probably, as I say, the bottom's all over the place, but we're sort of talking anything from 3 foot to 4 foot deep. So it's not a massively deep peg, but we've had a bit of rain and we just want to control the rig. So always better to use a slightly heavier float so you can control what's going on. I've shotted it with number 8s. Just number 8 micro shot. I've strung them out throughout the rig. Little tiny fish this time. I mean, it's great to see these little tiny fish. And I've got a hook length of 0.10 and I've got a size 16 hook on. I think 0.10 is going to be strong enough. There's not really any snags. I mean, I had to wade around, and apart from right in the edge on our right hand side, there's not really any snags. So if I do hook a big fish, I've just got to try my best to keep it away from those snags on my right hand side. So I think 0.10 is going to be good. After all, we're not aiming at catching loads of massive fish. So what's really noticeable, once it gets down the bottom of the swim, we just don't get as many bites. Having said that, right down the bottom, and we've got one. And a size 16 hook. I've got a crystal bend hook on, which I think is really important for maggot fishing. And it's just a medium gauge crystal bend hook. Now this is what fishing's all about to me. I mean, obviously, I love going on a commercial, I love catching loads of carp, but just to have the odd day out somewhere like this is absolutely brilliant. Just starting off easy with the feed at the minute, so sort of like 8 to 10 maggots each run down and probably 20 grains of hemp, and just really taking my time with the feed, because we can always up it as we get later in the day. We've had a couple of little barrel chub, but it's usually once you start feeding a little bit heavier that you tend to get some bigger chub. There we go, another nice fish. Look at that, another beautiful roach. I can't believe how many roach are in the river at the minute. We never used to see these fish, never used to see them. But they, beautiful fish. And I tell you what, nothing better than coming somewhere and catching fish that have never seen a hook, never been fished for before. You feel like you're doing something that no one else has had the chance to do. So you can see I'm always feeding. I always want to create a nice column of bait going through the water. Missed that one. And we'll always be messing around as the day goes on as well with this shotting and the depths. If I miss too many bites, or I feel the fish are getting a little bit sick of one style of presentation, I'll always be messing around with it. So it's a case of working all the time. So we missed another bite then. So what I'll do is I'll just move the float up a couple of inch. And when you stick float fishing, it's amazing. It's amazing the little changes that you can make and get a result straight after it. So that nice light main line makes things so much easier when you're putting the float down. There we go. So we missed 2 bites in a row, altered the depth a little bit, and we're into a fish. Another roach. I can't believe how enjoyable this is. Just getting out. It's a beautiful day as well. Let's try double maggot, see if we can catch maybe a slightly bigger fish. Just ease it down. No, actually it's a smaller fish. So I think single maggot. Look at that, the old gudgeon. He fell off before he went in the net. There's a little area where I seem to be getting my bites. Just about there, that seems to be the spot for getting a bite. Strain it out, let it go again. I think it'll help if we had a hook bait on that time. So what I'm doing is I'm casting out slightly downstream, then pulling the float back. So I'm straightening everything out and then letting the float go. I'm keeping my finger next to the spool all the time and controlling the line as it peels off the reel. So cast that out, straighten everything out, sort of hold it so it's all straight, and then we can let everything go. And just as that float settles, there we go, or bumped him. Just as that float settles, that's when you'll get your bite. Right, let's have a bit of a mid-session update. We'll start with the bad news. The bad news is we've not had a big old chub yet. I say yet because I'm hoping that later on in the session, maybe as the light fades, we might get a chance. But the good news is it's a bite every single run down, from little dace, little chublets, roach, a few gudgeon, and I'm really enjoying myself. So I've made a few alterations to the rig and how we're fishing and feeding. The water, I mean, I've obviously mentioned there's a bit of extra water on. The water is ever so boily. It's coming off a bit of a waterfall upstream, so the water's ever so boily. And I just didn't feel that strung out shotting pattern was working for me. I just didn't feel it was controlling the hook bait well enough. So what I've done is I've pulled all those shot down and I've created a little bulk just above the hook length, probably 4 inches above the hook length. Hopefully you can see it, probably. So I've created a bulk here. I've got a little dropper shot, another little dropper shot, and then I've shortened my hook length right down to 4 inches. I just feel that putting a shot quite close to my hook length, close to my hook bait, one is controlling my hook bait in that boily swim, and two, because we're not catching massive fish, we're catching quite small fish, I want to see the bite quite quickly, and by having my bottom shot close to that hook bait, we're seeing the bite a lot faster. We've found a little area where we tend to be getting most bites, which is sort of like 8 or 10 metres downstream. So, bump that one. So just where that flow settles down a little bit, it sort of steadies out downstream, whereas it's a bit of a boily mess right in front of me, which is putting that float through really awkward. So just as that bait settles, if we can get that bait just to settle and to go down really nicely in that little spot, 8 or 10 metres downstream, like I say, that's where we tend to be getting most of our bites. And it's actually, the extra water's making this peg a little bit awkward to fish, because if you don't run it down in the right spot, you don't seem to get a bite. I'm keeping my feeding quite light still, because I think as the session goes on, we might be able to up the feeding. Hopefully we'll time it right, and we'll up the feeding right at the right time, maybe as the light's fading, and it'll give us a chance of maybe hooking a chub. But at the minute, I'm going to keep my feeding quite light, because I don't want to risk putting these little fish off, because I'm enjoying myself. Still on a single maggot. 6 or 7 maggots every little run down. Maybe a little pinch of hemp. There we go. Little gudgeon again. it's safe to say I'm loving my day.
So folks, I've whacked the chest cam on. It's nearly dinner time, nearly time for me to pack up and get off home. So I've made a tactical change. I've broke out a pint of old casters. They absolutely stink. And what I'm doing is feeding quite aggressively now. So every rundown, getting 20 or 30 casters and feeding it into the swim 2 or 3 times. The plan is, if there's a chub in the swim, I want it to feed. Time's right now, time of day's right, the light is just absolutely perfect, and I think if there is a chub around, I've got a chance of catching him by upping the feed. So still on a single maggot. I'll say quite a bit of bait going into the swim. I'm still feeding quite a bit of hemp as well, but mainly those casters. I've crushed a few up as well, so odd bits are floating down the swim. I always think that's a good way of pulling some fish upstream. Better fish now. Not massive though, but probably one of the biggest fish of the day. So it shows that they're not being put off by the extra food, extra bait. Nice little barrel chub. I think what I'm going to do is carry on like this. I'm going to try and get rid of these casters. They're no good on my bait weight, so they might as well go in the swim. I've probably got another 10 or 15 minutes fishing before I've got to be on the road, but I'll just caught my finger then when I chucked it out with a bait on. So I've got another 10 or 15 minutes fishing before I've got to be off. Hopefully we hook a bigger fish, but if not, it's not so much of a problem. I've really enjoyed my day, loved every second. And I think this is one maybe for when it's freezing cold, hop back and see if we can catch some better fish. But that, it's going down beautifully, but getting the odd indication. It's the odd indication. Nowhere near as many bites as we were getting early on. I always think on these little rivers you sometimes do run out of fish, or you spook the fish. And those bigger fish, they're quite crafty on these little rivers. So yeah, I think this is one for another day maybe. Come back in the middle of winter when there's a bit of snow on the ground maybe, or we've had a heavy frost. There we go, another bite there. We'll see if we can catch some better fish, maybe with some bigger baits. I fancy chucking a lump of flake or trotting a lump of another little tiny fish. I fancy trotting a lump of flake down, maybe on a big float. See if we can catch some of those bigger chub. But like I say, I've got probably another 10 minutes more fishing. I'm going to plug away, see if I can catch one. And if I don't, it's not the end of the world. I've had a fantastic day.
Well, I think you can tell that I've mega enjoyed myself today. Sadly, no big fish. I can't wait to come back with some bigger baits, lobworms, some bread maybe, try and catch some of those bigger chub. But, as I say, love my day. Love rolling back the years, going back to the peg that I fished all them years ago. If you like these videos, please subscribe. It costs nothing. It means you'll get notifications whenever a new video pops up. It helps me out massively. And until next time, tight lines.